Hello! Welcome to another spooky episode of No Franchise Fatigue presents The Good, the Bad, the Weird, and the Wild, our monthly series where we pick one cinematic figure and dissect their filmography to pick one film for each of the titular categories. The good, the bad, the weird, and yes, you guessed it, the wild. I am one of your co-hosts for the next hour or so, and my name is Matt Reifschneider. Joining me is the only man that I will ever play Hunter Ninja Bear with, writer, editor, and producer Sean Caylor. Very nice to have you sitting here, because tonight we're going to be covering kind of a big deal right now. We're going to be covering his writing is what we're covering, but a writer who is kind of flying on cloud nine in 2020.
Very, very true. Just slip right in. Born in Melbourne, Australia in 1977, a young Leigh Whannell met lifelong friend and occasional working mate James Wan in film school, where they eventually came up with the short film Saw that was rolled into the full film Saw that launched both of their careers simultaneously. I couldn't be more excited to talk about Leigh Whannell, especially as a writer. This guy, as you said, is just on fire right now.
And he has been for quite some time. I mean, we've covered some other, shall we call them modern horror auteurs? It's probably a good phrase for that, for directors so far in this series. People like Eli Roth or Rob Zombie. But it's kind of nice that we're going to be talking about a horror writer, because often enough, the writers in horror movies tend to get overlooked. And I don't know if it's because, for the most part, it's horror movies and a lot of them follow a certain formula, or if writers have a tendency to jump genre pretty quickly.
There is also the vague tendency towards writer-directors in horror.
Like the two we mentioned, like Eli Roth and Rob Zombie are both writer-directors. And in this case, when we talk about Leigh Whannell, he's also a writer-director.
Now.
Right. And that's kind of why he's floating on cloud nine. Is, for those of you out there who may not be familiar with Leigh Whannell, his latest film is The Invisible Man, which is now on video on demand services where you can rent it, but it might be the biggest film of the year.
And the way this is going, it very well actually could be. Boy, talk about just amazing timing.
Yeah, he literally had the number one film coming out when he released Invisible Man earlier, and now with all of this quarantining and all of this fun stuff, it may actually end up being the number one film of the year, depending on how the movie theaters open up. We'll see. At least it will be for the next first half of the year. So,
or if movie theaters open back up.
Yeah, by the end of the year. That's a very big question. So, and it's a question that necessarily I don't want to dive into on this program because there's so much nuance to it. But I do want to say something before we get started. We should probably take care of some business. I want our listeners out there, if you guys like what you're hearing with us, if you guys revisit us, please don't hesitate. Please visit our back catalog. You can check out our episodes over at anchor.fm. So go check those out. We've got a lot of stuff. Like I said, Eli Roth, Rob Zombie, along with our mothership podcast. I don't know if we want to call it a mothership. That's too close to ID4 for me. But the mothership podcast, No Franchise Fatigue, where we talk about franchises. Go check out our back catalog. You can listen to us on Apple, Google, Stitcher, or Spotify, anyplace else. Please rate, review, and subscribe. Share with your friends as always. And you can follow us over at social media at facebook.com/No Franchise Fatigue and Twitter under the handle at nffpod. Now, hey, we took care of that. And, I'm going to hit it this time. You're going to be so happy. You're going to give me a clap. This is a podcast where we talk about spoilers. So, as we go through this writer's filmography, we are going to be talking about his films, and we will be going into spoiler territory. So if you do not like spoilers, please, if you hear once we announce the title of the film, please pause the podcast and go watch it if that's how you so deem. I'm not a huge spoiler fanatic. I feel like it's not about how a film is, but why it is, more so than anything else, how we get there. So just want to throw out that spoiler warning right now, since we always forget to do that, and I'm sure we piss people off when we do that. So That's the business, Sean. We're taking care of business every day.
Every day.
Every day, in every way. So that's us taking care of the business. So we are talking about Leigh Whannell as a writer, his filmography. We're going through the good, the bad, the weird, the wild. Why don't we start with the good? And why don't we start with you this time? We usually start with me with the good. I want to know what your choice is out of his filmography as a writer, what your pick for the good is.
So, this amazing horror writer. Obviously, I have to go with his non-horror movie, Upgrade. This movie is incredible. There is some horror sensibility, and it's still within our realm because it's definitely a genre film. It's probably the best action movie of last year to me. Or 2 years ago, 2018. Yeah, that was a 2018 movie. Regardless, Upgrade is just like unbelievable. The way it twists and turns the plot, it actually like has a twist at the end. Tragically, a lot of the action was spoiled in marketing, but it does not make it any less incredible. A lot of techniques he carried forward to Invisible Man, actually, visually speaking. Worked with the same cinematographer. Let me look that up because honestly, as much as we're talking about this in terms of writing, the movie's also just very kinetic. Leigh Whannell, it was his second directing. Second go at direction. Stefan Ducio, who is working with Whannell quite a bit right now, and they do beautiful work together. Just on a writing level, it's well written. It's funny. It's poppy, which we're gonna see a lot come up. We have talked about dialogue guys before. Obviously, Shane Black. It's one thing to have poppy, funny, quippy action dialogue, which, you know, given Upgrade's an action movie, fits within that. But Leigh Whannell has funny, quippy, poppy horror dialogue, and that is a different kind of talent. He's very impressive of making light of the dark situation. The whole scene where I want to say Tom Hardy, but it's Logan
Marshall Green.
Logan Marshall Green. Sorry, discount Tom Hardy is in the bar.
Don't you discount him?
But
Logan Marshall Green's fantastic.
Into the bar in his wheelchair is so funny and leads to such a great fight scene, which leads to yet another great joke when he just rolls out of the bar having murdered this dude in the bathroom. It is just, the movie's unbelievable. Great revenge story. What did you think of Upgrade? I'm sure we might touch on it again, but like generally.
Oddly enough, Upgrade is not on any of my list, so I'm happy to just kind of expand on it here. But I agree with everything that you said. There is a surprise to Upgrade that I wasn't expecting, and that is because, you know, as we talked about, Leigh Whannell was a writer first and foremost, and then, you know, as he started to transition to being a director, which he has proven to be very good at. You know, his first film was Insidious Chapter 3 as a director, which was a fine movie. It's an aggressively fine movie, right? And he does well enough in it as a director, but to see him have a movie that he is so fully in control of, both on a writing level, directing level, like Upgrade, is really impressive, and he knocks it out of the park. Like you said, it's got quippy dialogue. It genre bends really, really well. You know, it's an 80s film in a lot of ways, but it goes from action there's a horror to the action. There's a gruesomeness to it.
It's a very real body horror. Even the bad guys, they have gun arms. I mean, Cronenberg lives for that shit.
That is the perfect example, is that Upgrade has this weird kind of combination of being like a love letter to Paul Verhoeven and a love letter to David Cronenberg in a lot of ways. And as a film, I think it's super impressive. I remember seeing it in theaters and just being blown away by it. And this was Leigh Whannell even more so. I mean, he's got a lot of good movies in his writing career before this, and we're going to talk a little bit about those, but it's kind of surprising that Upgrade was so incredibly well written. His ability to world build in Upgrade through his writing and through like offhanded commentary or offhanded dialogue to create that world is super, super impressive. And he writes and directs that movie with such confidence that it just uplifts everything.
Even looking at the opening conversation of the movie, it's dude and his girlfriend, and she's making fun of him for still having a gasoline motor car. But everything about that conversation instantly tells you the world's moved to electric. That's common, but we're not so far in the future that nobody knows what this is. We're not in a Demolition Man where people are like, oh, a gas car,
Right. How quirky. And not only that, but like that writing in that beginning immediately tells you so much about the characters, him and his wife, the kind of chemistry that they have, this idea that he's a mechanic and he builds cars for rich people, right? He kind of as a novelty, but he cares about it, but he's a man that works with his hands. He's a man that does things for himself, right? There's this idea so that when, as the plot progresses and he, becomes paralyzed, he becomes a quadriplegic, it's devastating. It's a devastating move that we feel for that character, because that first 15-minute conversation where he is talking about like how he doesn't trust modernity and he likes to take care of things himself. He understands mechanics but not computers. And I think that that's a fascinating way to approach it. And again, very David Cronenbergian in a lot of ways, by having this person who, in the body horror element of it all, is visceral. He's everything is hands-on.
Well, and I actually think the Cronenberg and Verhoeven is a good comparison, because there's also just it's not just visceral, it's almost fetishistic, almost erotic, the way machinery is used in the movie.
Oh, for sure. And it makes it for this great kind of throwback film. There's a very 80s vibe to it. The score is very good. Very 80s.
I'm going to throw one more movie in this mix just so nobody will say we missed it. But also not a tiny bit of Tetsuo in there.
Of course, the Iron Man. And that's a good comparison too. That's a great film and a great series that, if for people who haven't seen Tetsuo the Iron Man, definitely go check that out if you like Upgrade, because there's a lot of interesting comparisons to be done there. So yeah, I think that's a great choice for the good. So I wholly appreciate it. And it kind of leads me into my choice for the good, which we briefly mentioned before. I happen to believe The Invisible Man is not only a good film, I think it's his best film as both a writer and a director. And, it's a timely topic to be talking about, as is it just came out and now everyone can see it on VOD. Yeah. But it's Invisible Man shares a lot in its structure from Upgrade. It's almost the perfect partner film to a movie like Upgrade, particularly with its themes. But The Invisible Man is both an incredible film on its own merits, but it's also an incredible update to an IP that, he was essentially given by Universal, or at least made a pitch to Universal on how to update The Invisible Man, and may or may not have kickstarted the Dark Universe when nobody expected that to ever be a thing or to ever work.
And I mean, as well as anyone, I'm the one that wrote the review for this for the site. Like, I was completely over the moon for this movie. Like, I truly, people overuse the term perfect and perfect movie. I've always resisted that because I feel so few movies are actually perfect. RoboCop, for example. Every chance I get.
Every chance I get. Murphy.
Legitimately.
Isn't the moon beautiful today?
The Invisible Man is a perfect film. The sense of paranoia you have, this movie creates a situation where the camera simply following Kate Moss through the house is terrifying because you know he can literally be there. He can be anywhere and you can't see him. You start to feel her paranoia because you as an audience member never knows when he's going to show up. This movie didn't use many jump scares, but the ones it has really hit. Like, really hit because Leigh Whannell has stretched you to the point of you've got the same paranoia. Like I say, you just don't know where he's going to be on screen. So when he does pop out, you're as scared as anyone.
And I think, talking about this with Upgrade is a good thing because we just chatted that Upgrade does pretty good with its exposition, being subtle in its exposition and world building. What's really interesting about The Invisible Man is he takes that to the next level. Like, as you mentioned, this opening sequence where Elizabeth Moss is sneaking out of the house tells you everything you need to know without dialogue. The exposition has become so subtle in his writing that he's melded his writing and directorial efforts almost into a singularity by this movie.
Never once see Griffin actually physically lay a hand on her. Everything we know about the relationship is completely exposited silently with her escape from the house at the opening, and I just can't even believe how effective that actually is. Just the idea of the dog showing up and her saying, "Sorry, I can't take you with me," that tells you so much. It's the first bit of dialogue in the whole movie.
Yeah. And it's incredible writing in those in how he approaches that, because he both creates this world and he has such an important anchor as Elizabeth Moss as an actress to be able to throw all of that acting performances to give us that exposition through looks, through how she works, through how her dialogue is said, even more so than what she says, is so important in this movie. But he also does this really brilliant thing in terms of writing for The Invisible Man, where he knows that an audience is going to see a movie called The Invisible Man. And immediately, even though, in this opening sequence, the Invisible Man, well, for lack of a better term, hasn't shown up yet. But even though he hasn't shown up yet, he gives you everything you need to know to be able to rationalize what the Invisible Man is. And then from that scene onwards, because we already know that this is a movie called Invisible Man, every time he lets a camera linger on a chair or a corner or whatever, that we're already looking for something. We're already looking there. And as a writer, that's a power. And as a director, that's a power that he wields with so much confidence and so much strength that it makes this movie a movie where not only in terms of theme and narrative do we have to believe her, but we already believe her before anything happens.
But I'll even do you one better on that. The movie spends a very long time dancing the dance of, is she really being haunted or is she just crazy? And a lesser movie would have made that the plot. And instead, this movie looks you dead in the eye and goes, you know what movie you walked into? You know she's right. And if you doubt her, that says more about you.
Absolutely. It challenges its audience, and particularly in a post-Me Too movement era, this idea of having to not only but believing your female heroine, your protagonist, but forcing your audience to confront that, even though it seems like it's trying to force you not to. Like the whole movie, like you said, it tries to gaslight its character, right? This idea throughout it. But you also have a movie where the villain, that's what he's known for, is gaslighting. I mean, specifically his brother says, like, this is what he does. He's done it to me for years. He does it to everybody. He plays everybody and he makes them believe different things. And so even if you try to not believe her, you feel like a dick for not believing her. But as I said, like, he knows that you went and saw a movie called The Invisible Man. And instead of, like you said, using that as the plot, he uses that against its audience because this audience already has this preconception of what this movie is. And I think that in terms of writing and direction, incredible stuff. the use of dialogue, the use of how the narrative works, and even by the time you get to the finale, which is not what you might think it will be, because the movie reaches kind of a natural climax with its tension, and then has another 20 minutes tacked on to the end for this falling action that further asks you to believe in her. And I think that that kind of a writing and that kind of, whether it's Jason Blum that gave him that creative freedom or Universal to say, yeah, you know what, that third act needs that to happen in the end.
And the last thing I'll say about it, and I'm just really diving both feet into full spoilers on this, or the fact that we can. Not even the ending. And boy, if our viewers haven't seen this movie, go see now. But every once in a while, you see just a perfect moment of horror where your gut actually drops out on you and you have like a physical, visceral reaction. And the dinner scene where her and her sister are reconciling is that for me, where she finally convinces her sister that something is really going on and that she did not send the email or whatever. And then the camera does the slightest right tilt and you see a knife floating in the air and it just slits her throat and lands in Elizabeth Moss's hand, and you suddenly instantly know what happened, and it is horrifying. It is actually emotionally horror.
He does that multiple times in this movie. That scene is one that I just adore, that moment, partially because it's the classic Three Stooges where they get you looking one way and they slap you from the other. He does that in that scene, but he does that multiple times, and not only just in horror, but like the movie is written so that Elizabeth Moss's character, in the beginning, she sneaks out. And then as the movie goes, she learns to stand for herself because she's the only one that can stand up for her because people don't believe her or whatever that is. And so you get a scene in the third act where she threatens to kill herself. And because she knows he won't let her do that, she plays that against him. And the scene where he stops her from killing herself, and when you realize that that's the plan, that's her plan, that's how he was going to show himself. It's cheerworthy. It's instead of like your stomach dropping out, it's like stand up in your chair and just start like waving your fists like a fucking wild man because you're like, yes, and she literally has a line where she's like, got you, right? And you're just like, the way that he paces everything in its writing is perfectly in tune to make those moments happen. And that is why The Invisible Man handedly gets my choice for the good and as his best.
And
not only good, best.
Probably the best wide release horror movie of the year because it looks like its only competition is going to be The Turning.
And The Grudge 2020.
Boy,
yeah,
you are lucky you reviewed that one for the site.
Stiff competition there. I know. I'm one of the few people that liked The Grudge 2020. And it's not like I loved it. I just liked it. And nobody else did. The Grudge 20, side note, The Grudge 2020 certainly doesn't deserve an F cinema score. So.
Doesn't it, though?
It is what it is. But that is The Invisible Man. I will end that there.
It started as a TV movie.
Yes.
Interesting. Yeah. That never happened to me until just now.
Yep, for sure. All right, so we are now covered the good. So let's look at the bad. What is your choice for the bad for Leigh Whannell?
So...
Oh, this is a hot take, isn't it? You are hesitating. You are hesitating.
Look, I know this is just me, and I understand this is just me, but all I can be is me, baby. And my pick for the bad, I really, really hate Insidious.
If we weren't quarantined and doing this over Skype, I would bitch slap you into next week. And you'd probably be thankful. You'd be like, that's another week out of quarantine.
Here's the deal with Insidious. I liked it when it was called Poltergeist. They are point by point the same movie. And I don't mean one ripped off the other a little bit. I mean quirky psychic. Granted, they modernized it and added her two bumbling sidekicks. But it's still family, daughter lost in ghost world. This house is clear. Like, it's just on top of the fact that I already am not the world's biggest fan of ghost stories. And haunted houses especially have a very been there, done that thing for me. Everything about Insidious is just generic to me. There's nothing about it that stands out in any way.
Brutal, man. No lie. If I was going to rank Leigh Whannell's scripts in terms of which ones I love the most, Insidious is number 3 out of all of them.
Wow.
I adore Insidious.
Like,
so we're going to have to fight here.
No, anything positive I have to say about Insidious, and I mean anything positive I have to say about Insidious, is Patrick Wilson and Lynn Shay. Because they're both fantastic actors who act fantastically.
Yeah, this is true. And Patrick Wilson is pretty much good in everything. He's kind of like the everyman's actor who's like just good in everything that he does. Doesn't matter. I mean, Aquaman.
And you think.
Yeah, whatever. So he's good. He's always good in everything. So here's how I'm going to approach this, because we're going to talk about Insidious here in a second. But I'm going to tell you what my bad is real quick, because it has to do with this. It has to do with what my reaction to your choice is going to be. My choice for the bad is actually Insidious Chapter 2. Okay.
So I can definitely see that, because you already took a movie I don't like, and then you take it in. Basically, it's what Poltergeist 2 would have been if they were still stuck in the same house.
So here's my thing. If I don't disagree with your comparison that Insidious is similar to Poltergeist, there is a lot of the same beats.
Similar.
Yeah, it is. I'll give you that. You can call it a parallel or a paranormal L. So no, I get that. So I love Insidious, and part of that has to do a lot with James Wan. It's not necessarily the script. I think the script takes some interesting turns, particularly that I think the first half of Insidious is like the perfect haunted house movie. I think it increases. Don't get me wrong. I think Poltergeist is a great movie and everything, but Insidious, the first half of that is the perfect. I love the idea of adding in astral projection. I think that is such a wild turn in that movie. And you can tell that was the crux. They're like, how do we make a movie about astral projection that's a horror movie? And then they start off with a haunted house movie.
Except you've got two of the hottest young visionaries in horror right when their careers are starting to take off. Not quite peaked yet, but starting to really take off. And all they could come up with is a black and white world where every once in a while you bump into somebody mumbling to themselves. Like, come on.
So, okay, I'm going to argue with you on that point. And we'll get into my Insidious Chapter 2, why I dislike it. And I actually weirdly dislike it for similar reasons you dislike the first one. So they were actually at the bottom of their career at this point.
Well, Dead Silence, yeah.
Because Dead Silence is a huge fault, and James Wan and both Leigh Whannell hated the fact that the studio interfered so badly with them on that movie. And then they went and did Death Sentence, which is a fantastic movie, which James Wan did, right? Death Sentence is great. James Wan did that one without necessarily Leigh Whannell's help, although I've heard rumor of such. But so that happens, right? That movie's a bomb. And James Wan talked about that he couldn't get a movie made after that.
Just going to note off of that tangent, you mentioned like good movie. I mean, like if we were doing a good, bad, weird, wild on James Wan, which we might someday, early spoiler alert, like Death Sentence is my favorite movie of his, bar none. That movie is so freaking good.
It's incredible.
Kevin Bacon's best performances.
Great film, right? As we all know, quality doesn't necessarily matter when it comes to theatrical box office. And so that movie bombs. James Wan talks about he could not get a movie made, which is why Insidious, rumor has it, was actually made for less money than Saw.
Wow. Oh, yeah.
He originally said that it only cost $750,000 to make Insidious, which is why you get like the further is nothing, because they were literally working with such a bare bones budget that it was like they couldn't get things going. Because reportedly Saw cost $1 million to make, right? He said Insidious cost $750,000. They got $250,000 more in terms of like editing and digital effects once they sold it over to Blumhouse and Universal or whatever, to Blumhouse picked it up.
I'd rather watch Paranormal Activity 4.
Yeah. Ooh, ooh. That is bold statement. We also very much disagree on the Paranormal Activity movies, if memory serves
I
right.
weird love for the Paranormal Activity movies. That's fair, yeah.
So, but
What?
anyway, so I think Insidious,
It's a Japanese Paranormal Activity movie. I didn't know that.
it's like Paranormal Activity Tokyo or something like
Or
that.
something like that. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So that's why I like Insidious. And that's why I would make that argument that even though it is parallels, it was a way for them to get a movie made. And the fact that they got a little bit of freedom from the studio system to make something that is execution wise pretty wild in terms of like performances. And I love the idea that the couple leaves the house at the 40-minute mark. You're like, haunted house movie. Here we're going through the tropes, especially because I didn't know anything about it when I went and saw it. I went and saw it opening night in theaters. I was actually went and saw it opening night at a midnight showing, and there was 3 of us there. There's nothing more scary than being like in an empty theater at midnight watching a movie like that has like a lot of spooks and scares, whatever. Same with It Follows, that movie.
The thing about them leaving the house, which credit to Leigh Whannell as a writer, props. They're just like, nope, we're out.
Yeah.
And that would have been a phenomenal twist if Haunting in Connecticut hadn't beaten them to it.
Yeah, right. For sure. Yeah, absolutely. Which Haunting in Connecticut, I think, is a terrible movie. Oof.
But it's still the same twist.
What was the weird sequel that they made for that? This is a whole side tangent. God, with, Haunting in Georgia?
Kate Sackhoff, yeah. That was a weird one.
Yeah, that was also terrible. I was like, whoa, what is this? But so I digress. I argue with you on Insidious. I get why you don't like it because it's similar. It's also the reason I don't like Insidious Chapter 2. Now,
which by all means, please elaborate, because I don't have any great feelings about. As a matter of fact, I like The Last Key the best of the three of them.
I actually like all of the Insidious movies, which is why, you know, off mic, I told you, and for our audience here, I thought it would be a good joke if I just picked all 4 of my choices were all 4 Insidious movies. My good would be Insidious, my bad would be Insidious Chapter 2, Weird and Wild would be other Insidious movies. But nonetheless, I'm not doing that, partially because I think that talking about the Insidious franchise as a whole is really interesting, particularly because it moves backwards in time, which is really strange. But Insidious Chapter 2. If you don't like Insidious because you feel it's too similar to Poltergeist, Insidious Chapter 2, I feel like pulls way too much from The Shining.
Yeah. Yep.
Except for instead of just solely about being the dad going crazy because the ghosts are influencing him and he's going to kill his family, it is a movie that has that and then also a subplot that's done found footage style, where the 2 goofy Tucker and Specs go on a side mission to a hospital with the mother of our father figure, his mother, and they go to a hospital to kind of investigate things, and it gets really awkward, and I don't think the narrative works for me. I don't think it's a bad film necessarily. I think James Wan as a director does some of the coolest things in modern horror with light. His use of light is just incredible. And even in like Death Sentence, his use of light is just like the church scene with the boards on the wall and you get the light streams in that final act in Death Sentence. Just pristine shit. But Insidious Chapter 2 for me just doesn't work because it's got 2 narrative plots that I just don't care about. It opens up by flashing back in time to a young Josh and a young Lynn Shay's character as a young woman the first time she meets him, except for it's a young actress that's not Lynn Shay, but has the voice of Lynn Shay, which is a really weird choice. Just totally throws me out of it. And then I will give them credit to Leigh Whannell, since we're specifically supposed to be talking about Leigh Whannell here as a writer, that this movie has the audacity to throw in time travel within the world of the further, which is this ghostly realm, that you're actually able, that time and space and time actually don't really exist in this realm, that it's all kind of fluid. Bold choice. I just don't think it works for me at all. I just like, I remember seeing this in theaters, loving Insidious, going to see this and being like, what the fuck? Again, dibs to Leigh Whannell, James Wan, and Jason Blum for taking the bold choice to make a time travel movie out of this haunted house movie that's also The Shining. But for me, it's just a mixture of a lot of things that doesn't doesn't gel together in a way that I want it to. In fact, enough so that if I was to rank the Insidious franchise, Insidious Chapter 2 is my least favorite out of all of them. Simply because I just don't think that it gels together. Bold choices. I just think a lot of misguided choices. So that's why. But your choice for Poltergeist, the weird him going full Jack Torrance in this movie is just so strange to me. And as much as I love Patrick Wilson, I just don't think the writing is quite behind that to be able to make those parallels work.
Yeah.
For that. But anyway, I digress. So obviously, for our choices is Insidious and Insidious Chapter 2. So who knew?
We're going to make a lot of fans off that one, huh?
Yeah, we're going to piss off a lot of people, but that's okay. And I totally stole your thunder on Insidious. I went off on a rant because I went off on that. I stole your thunder. I get why you don't like it. So
Nah, not much thunder to steal. I don't like ghost stories. I don't like haunted house movies, and this one ripped off one of the few ghost haunted house movies I ever liked. Like,
fair point. I will give you that. Fair point. A point to Sean for that one. I will give you that. So I just happen to like it. So all right. So moving on.
By the way, I will give it that Insidious is a better remake of Poltergeist than the Poltergeist remake.
Hold on. They made a Poltergeist remake?
Nope.
Okay. I didn't think so. I mean, that would be weird. Like, what would you do? Like, cast Sam Rockwell in it? Why would you do that? Okay, well, side note. Let's go to the weird.
Okay. So for my weird, I went with a comedy, and that would be Cooties. Easy to forget that Leigh Whannell wrote this movie, but
stars, right? He stars in it? He's one of the stars? Is he the science teacher?
He was in it, yes. Absolutely. As Doug, yeah.
Doug the science teacher.
God. So, Elijah Wood, Allison Pill, Rainn Wilson. Instantly, this movie is hilariously funny. Jorge Garcia, who you might know from Lost, also really, really funny in this movie. Basically, this is a zombie apocalypse film, but where the zombie plague hits toddlers, and it's basically about a group of school teachers trying to survive. It is hilarious. This movie is so unbelievably funny. It's a basic hero's journey for Elijah Wood, which is fine. That is the bones upon which some of the best screenplays ever written are laid. Everything we've said about Leigh Whannell's ability to write dialogue up till now is just exemplified in this movie. It is so funny. It is so poppy. It's so witty. Rainn Wilson is... I was never an Office fan, but Rainn Wilson is excellent in almost anything else I have ever seen him in. So I would call myself a Rainn Wilson fan. Yeah, I don't know. Did you ever see this one? What'd you think of Cooties?
I did. Now, you've kind of sold me on rewatching this movie. I actually didn't rewatch this movie this last week. I rewatched a lot of Leigh Whannell's. I didn't specifically watch this one, partially because I don't own it. And the reason I don't own it is I kind of hate this movie. But you somewhat convinced me to rewatch it. I really do need to rewatch it. When I first saw it, I had high hopes for it. But like how you feel about Insidious with ghost movies and haunted house movies is how I feel about horror comedies. I just generally don't like horror comedies. And while the premise of zombie children is very funny to me, the movie itself I thought was kind of a chore for me to sit through. And had you asked me to rank the Leigh Whannell scripts, as I said, Insidious was my number 3, I would have put Cooties as dead last. I actually think it's his worst script. Insidious Chapter 2 made my bad because I'm disappointed in it, because I love Insidious so much, but I don't love Cooties. Now, that being said, you are correct. There are some very, very funny things in this movie, including a joke that now seems incredibly dated, but there is a CrossFit joke where the gentleman is like, where the guy, like the big hero of the movie comes in, he's like, follow me, I do CrossFit, and then he immediately gets slaughtered. Okay, that joke works for me. But for the most part, yeah, I didn't love this one.
Well, here's the other thing, and this is almost going to seem to fly in the face of what I just said, but tragically, similar idea executed a little better was Little Monsters, a much more recent zombie film about a kindergarten teacher trying to protect her kindergarten class from a zombie apocalypse, where almost all of the humor derives from the fact that she's trying to pretend it's not a zombie apocalypse to keep the children calm, with possibly the greatest Josh Gad performance he will ever do.
See, I've never seen that one. You said Little Monsters? It's on Hulu, right?
It's on Hulu. It's really, yeah, no, that one's great. Like capital G, great.
Yeah, I've heard that one's really good. But again, because horror comedies are not my favorite,
Yeah,
I tend to not gear towards them. I tend to only catch them if I randomly have time or anything like that.
so out on zombie movies broadly. Yeah, that no, I totally get it. But for a weird, it is a weird script for Leigh Whannell. I do stand behind the choice, although I did personally like it. I think it's really funny. You can't deny the man's wit.
For sure. And that's why, like, as a choice for the weird, I totally agree with you. And in fact, like I said, it kind of convinced me to rewatch this. Maybe I'll give this another shot because again, I just don't love horror comedies for the most part. But I remember when I watched it, I was disappointed, partially because it's Leigh Whannell and I like him as a writer. But he does have good wit, and maybe I just didn't give this movie the chance that I should have when it came out. Partially because you said it has an impeccable cast. I mean, Elijah Wood has very slowly become like one of the horror genre's heroes over time. Partially because not only does he act in a lot of strange films. Come to Daddy this year comes to mind.
I will tell you, Maniac was great though.
I mean, yeah, talk about one of those great horror remakes, Maniac, things like that. He just does a lot of interesting stuff, and not only that, but like as a producer, he's one of the producers in Spectrum Films, and
he knows his movies super well too. I remember long time ago saw a podcast, or when they used to do video podcasts forever ago, like when we actually had little iPods. And it was just following like different celebrities around to the video store to like, pick what they'd rent. So video stores still existed too. And
I'm sorry, what was that? What's a video store? You mean like the Apple rental when you go to Apple's website?
Exactly. But I'll never forget, Elijah Wood is the one that introduced me to pre-Frighteners Peter Jackson. So that's where I learned about like Meet the Feebles and like because that's one of Elijah Wood's favorite movies, as it turns out, is Meet the Feebles, which explains a lot.
It explains so much.
But so yeah, no, I've always had a great respect for Elijah Wood. Honestly, he quite an icon.
Yeah, he's become something. Yeah, so I'll give you that. So I actually think Cooties is a good choice for weird. I applaud you for it. I will definitely give it another shot. So,
but how about yourself? What would you call his weird?
So I'm going to lean in. Part of his early career. I just briefly mentioned this before when I was talking about Insidious, but my choice for the weird is going to be Dead Silence. And the reason I'm going to choose this for the weird, because I do feel like this is a film that had quite a bit of studio interference, which seems to be the case, particularly in how they were supposed to edit the film and edit down some of the scarier moments.
So what you're saying is you just need more Slappy.
I just need more Slappy in my life. No, are you kidding me? A movie about a ghost ventriloquist who can haunt ventriloquist dolls and slaughters children in a hometown. This is the reason why it's my choice for the weird. Is Dead Silence, number one, has a weird amount of humor embedded into it in weird ways that isn't just like, oh, that's a joke. It's just a strange movie, number one. And number two, I think this movie might be one of the coolest modern interpretations of a Hammer film I've ever seen. It's got great gothic tones to it, including this old like mansion on the house like sequence in it. It's got this weird sensibility to like that the old Hammer gothic other world, like it's a person going to a weird place.
It also does kind of have that 70s kind of throw shit at a wall and see what sticks spirit that 70s horror movies had, especially Hammer.
Absolutely. And so like as a Hammer fan and growing up with Hammer movies, Dead Silence hits a lot of notes for me that I really enjoy. And although I recognize that in general, it's probably one of his lesser films as a writer, and even more so a lesser film for James Wan as a director. But Dead Silence hits so many of those notes that I enjoy. And the twist at the end, which is just so outlandish that I kind of have to give it my choice for the weird because it's just a weird movie.
It is a weird movie.
Particularly like, oh, both Leigh Whannell and James Wan had so much success after the Saw films that they're like, oh yeah, we're going to do a new horror movie and it's going to be called Dead Silence. And, there's a trick where it's a ghost and you can't speak around it. And it's obsessed with ventriloquist puppets. And there's like a little ventriloquist puppet graveyard. Like the puppets all have their own grave. It just so weird.
And
I enjoy the shit out of it because of it.
better take on the Evil Doll movie than, say like The Boy.
Oh boy. Yeah, the boy. No, what's the worst take on an Evil Doll movie? The Boy 2.
Yes. Like
That
I
made The
would
Boy
watch
1 look like.
Toys 4. Boy, I'm just slamming on fours today.
Yeah, you are just it's a foregone conclusion that fours not your thing. Wow, I'm so sorry. I apologize to everyone out there for that.
No, they're shame. Ding 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 ding. Shame.
Yeah. No, Dead Silence, my choice for the weird. Which I don't know. Are you a fan of Dead Silence?
So I actually visited it for the first time for this podcast, and I did like it. I am a lover of an Evil Doll movie, and despite not being the world's biggest Ghost fan, I chose to see this as more of an Evil Doll movie. Because, I mean, if you think about it, technically, Chucky is just possessed by the ghost of Charles Lee Ray.
Right. Oh, for sure. Yeah, this one definitely works more as an Evil Doll film, and let's be honest, the opening sequence where he finds the doll on the doorstep is incredibly scary.
Very creepy. And, I mean, say what you will about Chucky, say what you will about Evil Dolls and Puppet Master puppets and all this whatnot. They really tapped into the fact that there is just something inherently creepy about a basic-ass ventriloquist dummy.
Oh, yeah. And a ventriloquist person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, true. Right. Yeah, I'm looking at you, Jeff Dunham. When we end up finding out that all of those puppets are made of human flesh, I'm going to be like, yeah, I definitely believe that.
Totally saw it coming. Yeah, yeah. As a thing, you're still racist. It's okay. You just happen to have made $1 million off of it. So
yeah, exactly.
But anyway, Dead Silence, my choice for the weird. So that leaves us to our final category. And drum roll, what's your choice for wild?
Well, can't believe we managed to even get this far without touching on the franchise that made him famous, but he wrote 3 Saw movies, and which one? Which one am I choosing? Well, I'll tell you. The original, and here's why. I usually like to use my wild choice to either rave or rant, and this one is a rave. Seeing the original Saw in theaters awakened this new level of horror love for me in a way I didn't even understand at the time, because before Saw, I always loved slashers, and I've always loved horror. It's always been my thing. But Saw is where I realized, like, I really want the gore. So bad. It was my first torture porn. It was the first torture porn. I mean, one could argue it was really Hostel that started the genre properly, And that's fair because this movie's not as gory as you remember. But especially if we're talking about writing, the plot is twistier and more clever than you remember as well. There are so many red herrings as to who Jigsaw is in the movie. By the end of it, they try and pitch you on it being Carrie Elwes. They try and pitch you on it being Michael Emerson, who plays the orderly Zepp. They pitch you on everybody except the corpse in the middle of the room. So when he stands up and pulls that makeup off, that big reveal, that big twist at the end of Saw, that is one of those jaw droppers in the theaters that you never forget.
For sure. And I'm with you on this. Saw came out when I was a freshman in college. I saw it 4 times in theaters, like the first week it came out. I literally took everyone I knew to go see it because, as you mentioned, you grew up as a slasher fan, and we're of that age where slashers were just, if you were a horror fan, you grew up with slashers, right? That was like part of your education. So I am the same way. I grew up with a lot of slashers and things like that. I thought Saw was the greatest evolution of what a slasher is. In terms of writing, especially in Leigh Whannell's writing, you're just like, holy shit, this thing is bouncing back and forth in a narrative.
Create a serial killer who doesn't actually kill people, spouting this like life affirmative philosophy. It's just like, and it actually works. It makes sense in context.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Leigh Whannell's a writer, immediately creates this iconic villain in Jigsaw, who, as you said, is only shown in the last 3 minutes or whatever it is. Like, you never know who Jigsaw is until the last 3 minutes. He creates this icon on concept alone. And then once you get Jigsaw's reveal, and as you mentioned, that final twist when it's revealed that the corpse in the center of the room is actually Jigsaw, an incredible reveal. And, I was young, let's be honest. I was like 19, but I had seen, if not hundreds, if not thousands of movies by that time, so many of them horror. At that point, like, a lot of movies didn't surprise me. Like, you learn the formulas and everything and those kinds of twists. And that movie totally just pulled the rug out from underneath me. And you were just like, oh, like, because it literally is just like, you don't assume it's the dead person. Yeah. Right. And then going back to rewatch it, because I actually just rewatched all.
They see it earlier in the movie too.
They literally tell you in the movie, they're like, and throughout the movie, you're like, they like are so blatant with it.
Even earlier than that, it was Dr. Gordon's patient earlier in the movie.
Yeah.
And Michael Emerson Zepp is like, well, his name is John. And it's like, yeah, some of our orderlies get a real close and personal relationship with the patients. Like, yeah, no, it's really, oh, no, I can gush about this movie. The reverse bear trap. Can you name a more iconic horror symbol in the last 20 years?
Yeah.
I mean, it's up there with the Freddy Claw, that specific trap at this point, and the Jason mask. Like, I think it's that iconic.
For sure. And this movie's, in terms of how it's written in Leigh Whannell's writing, is just, there's so much going on. And not only does it create an iconic, it's got like 3 iconic things that come out of this. Not only the reverse bear trap, but obviously the doll on the tricycle.
Mm-hmm.
With the red swirls. Yep. So you've got the doll on the tricycle, and then the pig face. Mm-hmm. The pig face with the long hair and the red robe becomes kind of an iconic image. And so you're like, wow, there's just so much layering to this movie that upon rewatch, this is Leigh Whannell has been doing a lot of the tour circuit for Invisible Man and doing lots of interviews recently. And on one of the interviews I was listening to with him, he was talking about the interviewer asked a question, something to the guise of, what's a question you get asked the most? And Leigh Whannell mentioned that a lot of the times he's asked, how does he feel about creating the torture porn genre? And he says, he's like, a lot of people ask me that thinking that I'll say, oh man, I did not expect for it to go this far, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, but I couldn't be more proud. He's like, I'm proud of the Saw franchise. He's like, that was a movie that, I put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears in. And the fact that it created, as you said, Hostel might be more indicative of all of the formula in one, but Saw kind of created the popularity of that, set the groundwork for it.
I mean, the first time I literally heard the phrase was in a review for Saw, was "This is torture porn."
Yeah. Oh yeah. And he talks about, he's like, not to toot my own horn or anything, but I got to create an entire subgenre of horror. He's like, and I couldn't be more proud that became a thing. He's like, yeah, do I love all of them? No, not at all. But he's like, but it's, I couldn't be happier that people bought into it and related and wanted to replicate something I wrote. And he's like, that's such big flattery.
And again, to make it, personal to me, like my adult trajectory as a horror fan was modeled on Saw. I am still a Saw fanboy to this day. I even stand behind Jigsaw. It just came out a couple years back. Like, I am a die-hard Saw fan.
Yeah, same. I've seen them all in theaters.
That and Fast and Furious are like my two just franchises that I love.
Yeah, I'm the same way. And eventually we'll cover the Saw franchise. But this actually weirdly again leads into my choice for the Wild. It is not Saw 1, but Saw 3 that I'm going to throw out there for my wild card pick.
If I can short stop for 1 second then, since we're not going to get to talk about Saw 2, brief props to Saw 2 for one of the greatest moments of horror in the entire aughts, with the big gangster type tough throwing Amanda into a pit of needles, hypodermic needles. My skin crawls saying that sentence to this day. Props for creating that moment.
For sure. And I just rewatched Saw 1, 2, and 3 for the recording of this podcast, just to kind of refamiliarize myself with them. 2 is not one that holds up for me in a lot of ways in terms of the franchise. I think it's a good movie. I just don't. It does have Donnie Wahlberg, which might be a detriment for me. Who very much does just look like he's stressed out. He looks like he's talking to Mark Wahlberg the entire movie. He just looks really stressed and disappointed. But that scene where he throws her in the needles, the sound editing in that moment, Darren Lynn Bousman, who directs it, the sound editing in that with the crunching glass totally gets under my skin. You're just like in the way that she's just screaming as she's like, in the way that she moves in the needles, you're just like, it again, like you said, it just gets under your skin a little bit.
We'll probably never do Boozman. I will throw one caveat on that caveat. I adore Repo the Genetic Opera.
I actually think we should do Darren Lynn Bousman. I think that might be a fun one to talk about, because while he is pretty much strictly stuck, to horror movies, his career is kind of wild.
It's weird, right?
Weird. And so it'd be kind of fun to talk about him, but
that's fair. Anyway, sorry.
Nonetheless, so this leads me to Saw 3, because Saw 3 is a movie that when I saw in theaters, I actually was like, I didn't love it. And with each subsequent viewing, because I rewatch every Saw movie every time there's a new Saw movie, but every time I watch Saw 3, I like it more. And I realized that how good Leigh Whannell writes that movie. Because that's a movie where Saw 2 is a movie where it's like he wants to take what he did in Saw 1 and make it bigger and more complex. And he does so by, essentially giving 2 timelines and a multitude of characters. It makes Saw 2 an ensemble film in a lot of ways. Saw 3 is such a weirdly subtly character-driven movie where you essentially have 2 sets of characters. You have Jigsaw with Amanda on one end, and then you have the gentleman who's going through the trap.
And the doctor lady, yeah.
And the doctor lady on the other end. You have this essentially only 4 characters that really matter to the plot. And then everything else is kind of tied together. But what's so great is that, like the first Saw movie, the twist at the end isn't meant to be like a twist. There's the idea that the whole trap was meant to be Amanda's game as his protege is so clever in terms of character development for both Amanda for the villains. And you're like, God, that's really,
And
really smart
yeah,
writing. And so that's why this is my choice for Wild, because I didn't, especially on this last view, now that I've really gotten used to Leigh Whannell being really good at exposition, he's incredible at delivering exposition in subtle ways that in Saw 3, he does character development in such subtle ways for both good people and the villains, knowing that Jigsaw has become an icon. And even though, again, we don't necessarily agree with Jigsaw, it's not like we're believed him to be this like moral high ground or anything like that. We believe that he believes it. And I
yes.
think that's in Saw 3 really cements that as like maybe his best writing for Jigsaw as a character. And I think that's why it gets my wild card choice.
And one thing I'll tag onto that for Saw 3 is just on a sheer tension, like Hitchcockian level tension. The concept of having to perform surgery with a literal gun to your neck, I guess in this case, is really, really intense. Because, she goes in already saying, like, this is going to be a failing procedure and you're making me do it with power tools. And yet Amanda's like, and if he dies, you die.
Yeah. And I don't know. I just love this idea that embedded in this story, there's this story about vengeance that's embedded for both characters. The lead gentleman whose son had been killed, and he has to go through all these traps that aren't necessarily traps for him. They're traps for other people. And then he has to make the choices. And then also with Amanda being that she's the one that's setting up these traps that people can't get out of. There's this idea that's before it's revealed that there's another protege, which just bodes well. The writing for the Saw franchise is so strange that it's so interconnected, and yet they were essentially making this shit up as they went along within like short periods of time. It's just kind of is brilliant and baffling at the same time. But just the interconnected character work in Saw 3, just it ends up being like one of the best of the franchise for me because of that, even if like a lot of the traps are not necessarily the most memorable traps or anything like that. And this one definitely like triples down on the gore.
Oh, yeah.
So that, whether or not that was Leigh Whannell's choice or Darren Lynn Bousman's choice or Lionsgate's choice to just be like, well, everyone keeps saying that these are really gory, just triple down on it. You know what? We're going to give them what they wanted. So,
Well, judging by, again, the next couple Bousman movies, I'm going to say it's within his wheelhouse at least.
oh, for sure. And I don't, as a side question, how are you feeling that Darren Lynn Bousman's returning to the franchise for the latest film, Spiral?
I'm extremely pumped for Spiral, although Chris Rock writing instead of, basically anyone else that's written one of these things before. It's weird.
It's weird, but I don't know. It bodes. I don't know. I'm excited for it, but I'm more intrigued by the idea that it's going to essentially reboot the franchise. It's kind of the feel I get.
Cast is pretty good. I love Sam Jackson.
Yeah.
I like that it looks like it's not really a remake per se, or even a full reboot. It almost feels like we're judging by trailers here, but it almost feels like a cult situation, which I'm into.
Well, and which has been hinted at in the franchise prior. To a baffling degree, because when I know you said you defend Jigsaw, the eighth film in the franchise, but the fact that in 7 they insinuate that there is some kind of a cult at the very end,
the true followers of Jigsaw,
and then Jigsaw didn't run with that, just was baffling to me. I was like, that's such a cool idea that you guys just completely ignore.
Jigsaw was trying to do it was trying to be too clever for its own good, because it was trying to play the timeline thing again.
Right. Exactly. Right. It was trying to be really smart. And I was really disappointed, particularly because I like the directors of Jigsaw, and the film definitely looked different than the other ones and
Oh,
set
that
itself
scene in
aside.
the grain silo where the farming implements are falling down is really good.
Yeah. I actually don't think, I think Jigsaw is actually pretty well directed. But
The
it's just
guy,
not my favorite.
the guy whose leg is stuck in that wire trap under the floorboards. Oof.
Yeah. I'll give you, it's better than Seven. But there we go. I think that kind of
That does.
wraps up Leigh Whannell, right? As a right. Is there anything else you wanted to? I mean, did we not chat about that you wanted to hit on in terms of Leigh Whannell as a writer or anything like that?
I mean, not especially. If I was going to make any last second note, and it's a small one, but he's actually a totally decent actor too. He totally holds his own against his first acting role in his own movie Saw. Holds his own against
Carrie Elwes.
Elwes.
Carrie Elwes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, totally decent actor too.
Yeah. He's fun as Specs too in the Insidious films, even if the characters are occasionally annoying. But I think the only thing I want to add for Leigh Whannell in terms of a writer is that it's weird to think about for somebody who came out swinging in terms of the Saw franchise as a writer, that I feel like he's just hitting his groove right now.
That's fair.
And I think he's only gotten better with time. And while, again, I stand by The Invisible Man being his best film in terms of writing and directing, but I think he's only getting started, and I cannot wait to see where he goes from this point on.
Absolutely agree.
So that's all I've got last to say about Leigh Whannell. But thank you, Sean, for having this discussion about Leigh Whannell. This is exciting stuff. For our listeners out there, we do have our upcoming schedule. So next for Good, Bad, Weird, Wild for this series, we will be talking about the ultimate in, I don't know, 90s action. Is this, would you call him a 90s action director? I feel like that's what I would.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're going to be talking about Renny Harlin as a director in his filmography. This ought to be an interesting discussion. Initial thoughts on this one?
Well, anyone that listened to our Shane Black episode definitely knows one of these ones for me.
No, this is true. This is true. That's for sure. Yeah. So for those of you who haven't, you should definitely go back and check out our Shane Black episode for his as a writer. That was a writer that we covered for that. So for people who want to kind of take a look at his films and stuff like that, he's a director who got started in horror movies and then quickly moved to action movies in the 90s.
Directed the fourth Nightmare on Elm Street, for God's sake.
He did. He directed Prison. I don't know. Have you seen Prison yet with Viggo Mortensen?
God, no, I don't know if I ever have.
But yeah, starts off his career in horror, moves into kind of classic 90s action films. At one point directs the biggest bomb of all time. So, nonetheless, we got a lot to talk about with him. So, next Good, Bad, Weird, Wild, we'll be talking about Renny Harlin. So please prep your viewing cues for that. Otherwise, please check us out over at Blood Brothers. We're both writers for Blood Brothers Film Reviews. I actually just posted my most recent review up today for a movie called Hitchhike from Hell. I'm sorry for anybody who's seen that one. So definitely check that out. But if you guys have any requests or anything, please hit us up on social media over at our Facebook / No Franchise Fatigue, or over at our Twitter at nffpod. Please reach out to us. Let us know what your favorite Leigh Whannell films are. And please let us know, if you feel like we got anything wrong or right, or if there's anything else you would like to see us cover in terms of content. We're happy to take listener requests.
Absolutely.
Where can we find you, Sean?
I can also be reached quite directly at nffpod.sean, SEAN, my name is a 4-letter word, at gmail.com. And otherwise, the Facebook page and the Blood Brothers Reviews is the best place to find me.
Yeah, and you can find me at on Twitter as @themoviemat. But yes, @themoviemat. You can find me on Twitter. You can also find me at the Facebook and Twitter's accounts for No Franchise Fatigue. But other than that, everybody, thank you for listening. I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your evening, a wonderful week. As we record this, we're still in quarantine, so please be safe out there, stay healthy.
Thank you guys for listening, and have yourselves a good night.
Have a good night.